Hello, one and all, and welcome to episode 17 of the Contest Round podcast. And as you all know, where you can find us are our YouTube playlist. We've got a special playlist you can check out. We've got SoundCloud, we've got Spotify, we've got iTunes. Make sure to follow us on those types of areas because obviously you get to see this when it pops up. So yes, this is going to be episode 17. Which we focused on a lot of different things. In particular, Kabam's logic in content difficulty building. And we are bringing a very special guest, someone that, and I will introduce him properly in a moment, but DNA 3000, if you haven't been on the forums, you haven't seen DNA 3000's work, this is an absolutely amazing opportunity myself and Dan have to pick his brains on some of these incredibly in-depth and analytical discussions as well as information he brings to the table. But first, I've got to introduce my glamorous co-host, who has this week been doing amazing work up on frontlinemcoc.home.blog. Make sure to go and favorite it. Make sure to bookmark it so you get all your daily dose of information. That's all about Marvel Contest Champions. And this week he's been doing some work on 6.2.4 destructive feedback, a little guide on there, and as well his 63-month progression in game. Dan, hello.
Hey Rich, how we doing?
We're doing good. I think it's one of these weeks where we've had a rough couple of weeks in game.
Oh yes,
let's face
yes
it.
we have. It's been a bumpy road.
It has been incredibly bumpy, and we are looking forward, I think, to see the end of it. Whether or not there's going to be a big announcement from Kabam, which may be something we'll discuss in the podcast today. But this is a special one,
For sure.
and I think it's probably just best that I introduce him and we get into this.
Yeah, let's get into it.
So, I'd like to introduce our guest. They have said that his real name is actually Jarvis, and he's actually the first android made by Dr. Noonien Sung. All I can say is he knows a lot about data. We love him 3000. It's DNA 3000. Welcome.
Good morning.
Although there's this epic build-up and it's just like a very kind of calm and solemn good morning. All the way from Hawaii at the moment, which is incredibly impressive, and it's very early in the morning, so thank you again for your time.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So we are going to talk a little bit about some of the amazing analytical data that you do bring to the table from, well, that's what we're going to start. I want to pick your brains a lot about the stuff that you create, but I want to do a bit of getting to know you, because a lot of people may know you from the forums as obviously DNA 3000 and obviously the data you put, but there's a lot of questions about where you first came to this game, and I'm going to start off with what made you come to Marvel Contest of Champions as a game?
Well, as has happened with a lot of the games I play, it's actually got me involved in the game. It's often been the case that my brother will play a game, tell me, "Hey, this is a really great game," and then I'll start playing it, and then he'll quit like a week later. And so he likes to play a lot of games. He likes to show them to me. I see them. I play them. Oftentimes, I quit them as well. Sometimes a game sticks, and in this case, Marvel Contest of Champions stuck. And so now I've been playing it. I think sometime. I think I started. I'm not exactly sure when I started, but I believe I started sometime in the fall of 2015. It's difficult to say. My brother started playing the game. He started showing it to me. I popped into it. I logged out of it, and I came back to it. So there was an initial period where I was just sort of casually just looking at it to see if it was something I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But I started really playing it a lot, I would say, by the end of 2015.
Wow. That is there anything that obviously you've got have a incredible amount of analytical knowledge. Is there something in like your background or your type of profession or study that gives you that interest or as well like knowledge when looking at a game like this and creating the analytical data that you do?
Probably it's just more the way I am than my background. My education, I'm an engineer by education, but I'm an IT professional by job. It's often the case. You go get whatever degree you want, and then you get whatever job you want. They're not necessarily the same. But I will say that the overlap between my education and my career has always been problem solving. I've
Yeah.
always enjoyed problem solving.
Mm-hmm.
But I think even before my educational pursuits and before my career, I've always loved games. Just kind of games, just card games, board games. And then eventually it became, of course, video games in the 80s and the 90s. I played a lot of MMOs when those came out in the early 2000s up until not that long ago. And in fact, when I started playing MCOC, this was actually sort of my way to take a break from MMOs. I was at one point a very hardcore MMO player.
Yeah.
But they can put a lot of demand on your time. Not just time. You can't just be standing in line at the grocery store and pop into an MMO. You have to dedicate time to sit in front of your computer and play. And I wanted something a little more casual. So ironically, I got into MCOC.
You traded one addiction for another. No, it's fine. This MCOC game's casual.
Yeah.
But when you're playing a lot of MMOs and you get very involved in them, you start exercising those problem skills and those problem-solving skills, those analytical skills. You start breaking down the game. You start looking at it from a lot of different angles. The higher in progression you go, the less casual you can generally approach the game, at least from the point of view of trying to understand the game. The games get more the longer you play them. Initially, I thought, oh, this is a light, casual game. I can just play for 5 minutes. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to think about them very hard. But again, if you've spent decades tearing games apart and getting in depth in them, becoming a min-maxer in them, progressing as high as you can, eventually it comes back. And the longer I played MCOC, the more I became tempted to take a look more closely at the game and how it worked.
That's pretty cool. I mean, that's a pretty cool thing to. I mean, for me, it used to be a case. Played World of Warcraft, did that for several years, and then changed to World of Tanks. I've always picked up several different things, but I would say for a time World of Warcraft before it became too extensive. Was that one of the games you might have played?
I played World of Warcraft for off and on for a little while again because my brother. But actually, and this is maybe this is not a coincidence, but I did spend a lot of time playing the superhero-related MMOs, the Western superhero-related ones, City of Heroes, DC Universe Online, Champions Online, and there was something appealing about playing those games. I guess maybe there's a little bit of the fantasy element of it, a little bit of the, I guess in what I've noticed anyway. This is my perspective, is that those games tended to be slightly less rigorously balanced than, say, World of Warcraft or EVE Online. Because the idea was to give you this feeling of having a lot of power. Yeah. And so they were often, maybe, I would say, slightly broken, but in entertaining ways, specifically deliver that experience. And so that's something that perhaps doesn't exist as much in MCOC. No. But there is a connection there, I think.
Yeah, and I think you kind of clicked onto something when you talked about. I think the same thing with me when I was playing World of Tanks. In between like loading screens, I was just like doing fights in Marvel Contest Champions. But it's handy to like say like when you go out and about, you've got your mobile device, you just turn on your mobile and like boom, you're straight into playing. The same thing, like rather than say you can't bring your PC down and whilst you're watching with your partner a movie on the TV, you can't be playing like with this massive computer setup and like spending time. So having this handy device and the game allows that kind of a little bit more freedom and flexibility that requiring you to be so heavily at a computer would have.
Exactly.
Very interesting, because that's when it was going to be one of the questions. Other games you might be playing, but when it comes to MCOC, back to it, what's been your favorite quest over the last 5 years?
Favorite quest? Hard to say. There's a lot of the game that I enjoy. I will say that the boss rushes have all, especially the community generated ones. I was actually someone who made a fight in one of the boss challenges, and I found that to be very fun. Not just building it, but also seeing how everybody else builds theirs.
Yeah.
What the thought process was, or trying to figure out what the thought process was. I posted something on the forums, I think, with the boss challenge that I was involved with, because when it's just sprung on you, you have only a certain amount of time to figure it out and play the content. But because I was involved with the creation of one of the fights, that also gave me an additional advantage in that I got to see everyone else's fights ahead of time when we were beta testing it.
Yeah.
And so that a month or so to really think about, well, why did they do this, or why did they do this? And so when the content came out, I was able to sort of give my impression of not just how the content felt like playing, but what did I think the developers were thinking, the players were thinking when they built them.
Yeah.
Which I thought, kind of see, what do you think is fun, and what do you think is fun? And,
Gotcha.
What I thought was fun, and this is how I designed mine.
Yeah.
And I could say, Legacy is clearly insane, and that's why he thinks that fight's fun.
We totally understand. We totally understand that sentiment.
He's good. He's good at the game. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
Forums that Legacy must really think highly of us, because he thought that's what we wanted, right? He must think that's how good we all are,
Yeah.
We're better than we really are, and I guess that's a compliment. He thought that fight was a fight that that players would look at and go, I can do that, no problem. So, yeah.
Okay, so the topic of today's podcast is talking about the difficulty side of things with the game. We were both taken, myself and Dan, by your fantastic post, as well as many other forum posts that you've done. I've featured a lot of them in the past because I find they're incredibly interesting to read. I'd see that a lot of effort has gone into them, and they're always incredibly well received by community members. But there's one, obviously, you posted about the difficulty curve, which is one of the most interesting ones. And I'll put a link in the descriptions and the bios for people to go and check that out, because it is well worth the read. But I'm now going to throw this over to Dan to weave us into some questions about this particular article and further discussions on the difficulty curve with Kabam's content.
Sure thing. Thanks, Rich. So DNA, first off, where did the idea for this article come from, as far as going back and looking through the different acts and in the permanent story content and saying, all right, I'm going to try to come up with a formula that tells you how the difficulty is scaling? What were you trying to prove there?
Well, so your first question, where did the idea come from? Difficulty is something that I've been thinking about in the game for a very long time, going back to maybe even before issue 12. And I've posted here and there little ideas I had about difficulty. I posted a thread a while back about what I thought made an interesting challenge. And I think it was that post that actually was why Kabam invited me to do the boss challenge. But the specific trigger for that post, the difficulty curve post, actually comes from the book 2 beta. I was in the book 2 beta, and from within minutes of the beta going live, it seemed that people were immediately commenting on the difficulty of the content. And a lot of people specifically were talking about how attack and health, attack specifically, was continuing to get higher in that content. It was 100 plus 100% more attack than, say, in 6.4. And initially, I didn't think much of it, because I was in the frame of mind of, well, 6.1 is this, 6.2 is this, 6.3 is this, 6.4 is this. So Act 7 should be the next thing. And then I started to play the content, and I got diverted slightly. By the time I was playing the content later that day, people had moved on a little bit to discussing the nodes and how difficult the nodes were. But there continued to be this very persistent complaint about how attack was so high that it was making the content difficulty unrealistic or unreasonable. And that complaint was coming up in a number of different ways. Just some people were just specifically talking about the fact that the numbers just seemed ridiculous. And a lot more people were talking about the side effects of that taking an immense amount of block damage, even parry damage in some fights was immense.
Right.
And that was combining with the difficult nodes to make the content extremely difficult. And my initial impression was, well, yeah, it's difficult, but it doesn't seem to be ridiculously out of range. If you compare to Act 6, Book 7 makes perfect sense. And my initial comments about the difficulty in the beta were, well, yes, it's harder. It's hard, but it should be harder than Act 6. But the longer I thought about that, the more I started to think that there was something wrong with that idea, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But I started to make posts in the beta saying, I'm changing my mind on this, or maybe not changing my mind, but I think there's something wrong, and I'm not sure what. But I'm starting to agree with people that the difficulty is there's something wrong with it. And I didn't want to say high. I mean, when you say difficulty is high, what do you mean by that? There are lots of high difficulty fights in the game that people don't complain about. The Grandmaster fight, the Infinity Thanos fight. These are hard fights, but people don't complain about them to the same visceral degree. And that got me thinking, well, why is Book 2 harder than Act 6? And the reason why is because there's a progression in difficulty from Act 4 to Act 5 to Act 6 to Book 2. So if we presume that that progression makes sense, then Book 2 is kind of where it's supposed to be. But then that got me thinking, well, we're all assuming that Act 6 has the correct difficulty. And that's an easy assumption to make because, well, when Act 6 first came out, I did Act 6.1 more or less as soon as it came out. So it can't possibly have the wrong difficulty. But then I realized that I was thinking about Act 6 wrong. And I came to this realization because I was thinking about Act 6 in terms of the very first people who are going to tackle it. When Act 6 comes out, when Act 6.1 and then the other chapters come out, of course, the very first people to tackle it are the best, the strongest, and the highest tier players. Makes sense.
Yeah.
So we're tuning the content for them. But I don't think that makes sense. I started to think, well, what happens in a year when they're all long gone and they're off to Act 7 or Act 8 or whatever, and it's now average players that have to play Act 6 because that content is permanent content. It's going to be around for time. But we scaled it to the top tier players in the game. Maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe it only makes sense in the first month after it comes out because there's this flood of top tier players playing it. So I started to think, well, if I was designing Act 6 just for the average player, how hard should it be? Like, how hard should it be relative to Act 5, to Act 4, to uncollected content? And once I started thinking about that, I started thinking, the numbers just, they don't seem right. They always seemed right to me compared to strong players. But when I erase it, and I just think, well, what's the average player going to do? All of a sudden, I'm looking at these plus 500, plus 600 attack ratings just as the base. That's before you look at nodes, before you look at difficult champions. So I said, well, maybe I should try to work backward. Maybe I'm doing this wrong. Instead of looking at the numbers and asking, do the numbers make sense? I should go the other way. What should the numbers be? If I didn't know what they were, what would I make the attack bonuses and the health bonuses in Act 6? And I realized that question itself was kind of based on how hard Act 5 is and how hard Act 4 is. And so I said, well, let's see what the developers actually did in terms of scaling up the content. And once I got that idea, well, let's see what they really did quantitatively. What did they do with the numbers? Separate from what they did with picking champions and separate from what they did with picking really tricky nodes. Just how much numbers did they really throw at the players and what do they really mean? That's when I decided to start looking carefully at how do I quantify this? How do I say in a way that's easy to understand? How much harder is a 4-star than a 3-star? How much harder is a 6-star rank 4 than a 5-star rank 2? And then how much is 100% attack going to make the content more difficult in that context? We understand 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, 5-star. What is 6-star plus 100 attack? What does that look like? And that's what led me to try to come up with a way to create a formula, a calculation that allowed me to compare everything apples to apples. And then really what I wanted to do was to use that calculation to convert the numbers into a graph, because it's very easy to look at a graph and just say, well, this makes sense to me or this doesn't make sense to me, whereas the numbers are often opaque. You can argue numbers. There's often not an intuitive sense of What does that mean? And that led to that book.
Yeah, oh, God, absolutely fascinating.
I know, right?
Yeah, I mean,
you can tell the engineer in him, right, Rich?
yeah.
He's like breaking apart the problem.
Obviously, didn't want to interrupt at any time because the thing is,
Yeah.
it's fantastic. Like, there's always been an off the cuff remark I've always said on my channel, which is a lot of the content is built for the 1%. It's a very off the cuff remark. I don't really mean much of it. If I was to ever kind of go into more detail, it would be exactly what DNA 3000 said, is that the players that go into it on day one and maybe are, again, the incredibly skilled, this may be somewhat doable, but when it comes to, say, several months down the line, then there's a larger population that will just go, hey, we're average Joes of the game. We love the game, but it's not something we're able to really do. And I think that's where we've come to a stage now. Act 6 is done and dusted, and it's only been in the last week or two that people have come out to say, oh, look, just to let you know, I think this content is a little bit over the top, and now we're obviously seeing this extensive feedback loop when it comes to, Kabam, what are you really doing in the future, and also what have you done in the past? That's another point. What do you think about all this situation, DNA 3000, with like the feedback on the difficulty?
What do I think about well, I think there's always been a group of people that have been concerned about the difficulty. When I say group of people, it's not the same person every day, but there have always been complaining about difficulty. When Act 5 came out, there were a lot of people complaining about the fact that the collector was a cash grab.
Yeah.
Probably, people call everything a cash grab when it's initially difficult. And Act 5 in general was seen as much more difficult than people were used to. But again, the initial people who were doing it, the people who were in a position to do it, are of course going to be the people who are farther ahead in progress. So they're less difficult just because they are stronger players. And then as more and more players progressed through Act 4 and got to Act 5, they began to see that this was a substantial jump in difficulty. But for most of us who had already gotten past it, it was difficult to really relate to what those complaints were about. I mean, we did it. It was not that difficult. And what I used to say on the forums is, if you're not ready for the content, well, then wait until you're ready. Build up your roster, rank up your champions. If it's difficult to do with 550s, wait until you have 455s. Wait until you have 565s if you want to obliterate the content in that way. I mean, there was always a out-level the content, so to speak. Like if you were a powerful player, you could just jump in there with 440s and just go to town. But weren't that strong. You could just hang out, build up roster, and tackle it later. And I think that was Act 5. That's kind of true. I mean, if you hand even an average player a team full of 565s. Granted, there's a separate discussion of how they're going to get them. But if you hand them a max strength team, they're going to probably find Act 5 not that difficult. The difficulty will come down as their roster goes up. But I think with Act 6, that's much more difficult. And that was one of the things that I realized as I was writing that post and looking at the numbers is the difficulty of Act 6 is not something that the average player can outlevel, simply because no matter how strong a champion they're going to get, given what exists today or what's likely to exist. Even if you were to give them the maximum conceivable team today, which isn't even rank 3 6 stars, it's rank 5 6 stars, which no one can make. But even of that, handing the average player that, I'm still not sure if they can get through Act 6. So, but I think
one of your big takeaways was Act 6 is already tuned for 8-star champs. That's not a typo. That's what it would take for the average player to level into Act 6, and that's problematic. That was like one of your key takeaways from all that data, which is kind of astounding when you think about it.
And that's a consequence of the fact that, and I think maybe some people might have seen that and go, even though I say that's not hyperbole, it has to be. But we're used to leveling in with 5 stars. We're used to, when we go from rank 1 to rank 2, the champions become much stronger. And when we go from rank 2 to rank 3, they become much stronger. But as we've seen with 6 stars, Kabam is starting to put in some diminishing returns there. The jump for 6 stars from rank 1 to rank 2 is comparable to what we get with 5 stars. But from rank 2 to rank 3, it's only half as much. And even if they just hold it to that level, that means that when we get to rank 5, 6 stars, that's not going to be the jump as with 5 star from rank 1 to rank 5. It's going to be more like from rank 1 to rank 3, rank 3.5, right? In the same sense, which means to get to the equivalent of what we would think of as a rank 5, 6 star, comparable to rank 5, 6 stars, we actually have to get all the way out into 7 stars to get that same level of power increase, the power curve increase. Which means really we could conceivably get all the way out to 8 stars before we get a champion that is stronger than what we would have thought a rank 5, 6 star would have been before rank 3 came out and we saw this diminishing power curve. And that's part of the problem is because the content is accelerating in difficulty, it's getting stronger and stronger, at least up until this point. But are starting to decelerate in terms of how much more powerful they get as we rank them up. That curve's diverging now. We're getting weaker relative to the content quicker than we were before.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's the big design conundrum takeaway from all of this, right? Is that they're just pushing way too fast, and that's why a lot of people are feeling you put into charts to explain, well, this is why you're feeling the way you're feeling, because it is going so fast. And I think for the people that have been giving Kabam some pushback on, it's like, well, here's what we'd like for you to design more content. We don't want these high attacks where if I block, I die. It's like, well, this explains why you're feeling the way you're feeling. It's not just like, I don't like this and it doesn't feel great. So I think for a lot of us, it was kind of astounding to see it charted out, and then how it spikes up into Act 5 and then it way into Act 6. So were you actually surprised by how steep the curve was once you plotted the whole thing out?
So I don't think I was surprised by the curve, because I always knew, and I think anybody who really looked at the game's numbers even a little bit recognized that the difficulty was, if you just look at the content's difficulty was increasing exponentially, right?
Yep.
The fact that with the simple fact is the champions get stronger, and then the buffs get stronger on top of the champion.
Oh, sure.
In terms of numbers, and then the tactical buffs get more complicated on top of that. But what did surprise me is that curve is perfectly fine if our champions get stronger at exactly the same rate, right?
Yeah.
If think about it, if the champions in the content just went from 3 star to 4 star to 5 star to 6 star, that is an exponentially increasing amount of difficulty because the champions get exponentially stronger. But that wouldn't matter if we were tackling the content with 3 stars and then 4 stars and then 5 stars and then 6 stars, because we would always be able to level up to the same strength as the competition, as the defenders. And then the strong players would get there sooner. They wouldn't have to wait for 6 stars. They could just do it with 5 stars or 4 stars. But we, average players, let's say, could wait until our roster caught up. So as long as they wait for the roster to catch up with the content, then we can debate whether or not that it's too slow to acquire champions or whatever. But at least there's a path to victory, right? We just wait till our roster catches up close enough that our skill can jump over the rest. But if the content is accelerating faster than our rosters are going up, then in a certain sense, it doesn't matter if Act 5 is too difficult or if Act 6 is too difficult, because eventually, for everyone, for not just for the beginners or the average players or even the endgame players, but even the highest tier players, the legacies and the Setons and the everybody else and the analyzers and everybody else, eventually that curve is going to beat everybody. I mean, eventually content is 5 times stronger than you, or 10 times stronger than you, or 100 times stronger than you. Skill is eventually going to run out. Nobody has exponentially increasing skill. So it was just a question of when that would happen. And the graphs seem to suggest that it has already happened in Act 6. But even if I'm wrong, even if my calculations, which have margins for error, and I couldn't look at everything, and I mentioned that in the article. Even if my calculations are off, even if my numbers are not perfect, the curve says that eventually the content is going to beat us. If not in Act 6, then in Book 2, if Book 2 had continued the pattern. And eventually, when it gets to the point where not even the endgame players can do it at all, what are you left with? And I think that was part of what caused me to realize that this isn't even about the endgame players. I mean, this curve tells us that if Kabam just kept doing what they were doing, eventually they would exceed the capability of even the highest tier players. But I think that the real problem is that they were even trying in the first place. That something that I think I mentioned in other places. I think if Kabam has done one thing horribly wrong with difficulty, I don't think that the nodes are as bad as everybody says they are, with some exceptions. And I don't think the champions are as difficult to fight as a lot of people say. But I do think that where they went wrong, and where they went wrong in a way that I think none of us really appreciated or really articulated clearly, although there were some people who were saying this, but where I think they went wrong is at some point they decided that the design for Act 5 and the design for Act 6 should be tuned to the strongest players in the game because they're the ones who are going to do it on release, which makes sense.
Yep.
But they didn't think about the fact that the story arc content is supposed to be for everyone. It's supposed to be for progressional content. If this is the content that everyone, or at least most players, are supposed to be able to do, shouldn't we be targeting it right away for the average player? In a sense, the problem with Act 6 is it's trying to serve two different masters. It's trying to be progressional content for the average player, and it's trying to be endgame content for the endgame players on the day it's released. But since the content change after day one, if we target it at the endgame players, it then permanently gets fixed to be that high, even when the average players finally reach it. And I think the only way to solve that is to rethink not how they design difficulty, but what their goal for difficulty should be. It's clear they wanted to make it hard.
Oh, yeah.
And make it hard. But what they should be doing, I think, is they should be saying, no. The story content should be tuned for the average player.
Yeah.
But then we want to serve the endgame community. Then we have to say, look, the priority for story content should be average difficulty. And then let's put something on top of it. Many players have mentioned this in the past. I think Brian Grant mentioned this in his video regarding difficulty, and other people have mentioned this. Challenge content, challenge modes of content where the average player does a version of Act 6 which is tuned for the average player, which it's supposed to do. But to make sure the endgame players aren't bored when it comes out, they get to optionally run a challenge mode version of it that is more difficult with commensurate rewards. Roughly like what we do with variant difficulty, but not exactly. With variant difficulty, mode where it's trivially easy because it's really just a flashback to show people what the game looked like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And then there's a variant difficulty for the people who really want something difficult. I think that the story arc content should kind of have a similar feel where instead of it being too easy, there's an average mode difficulty, and then there's a variant mode difficulty. And then we need to decide that Act 6 is already at variant level difficulty. And that what has to happen is there needs to be a version of Act 6 that is the normal difficulty for the content. If we do that, then we also have a path forward for, say, Book 2. Book 2 should not be harder than Act 6. It should be where Act 6 should have been in the first place. But to make sure that the endgame players aren't bored when it comes out, we have a variant difficulty mode ready for them so they don't just sleepwalk through the content. They get what they want, they get endgame content. And the average players get something that they need, which is progressional content that they could reasonably do with rosters they're likely to have.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. We solved all the world's problems.
But then where do you come in line with stuff like the Abyss of Legends, Labyrinth of Legends type thing? Would that be something you would prefer to see more of the Kabam looking at making these restrictions that they've done for Act 6, as opposed to like saying, well, there are challenges, but maybe retooling this for the endgame player instead.
Well, in terms of things like Labyrinth and the Abyss, I don't have a problem with the difficulty in those in general. I mean, they could be easier, they could be harder, but since we know they're targeted for endgame players, I think the standard is different. When you're making content specifically to be a challenge, then I think there's less of a concern about, well, what will the average player do? We do want to make sure that we provide challenges for average players, but I don't think every piece of content needs to be appropriate for every single player.
No.
I haven't actually gone through Labyrinth, not because it's difficult, but because it just takes too long. I mean, it was too difficult for me to do. Now, I could easily do it, except for the fact that I don't want to sit in front of my phone for 8 hours and grind the path.
Right.
But that's not a problem with the content. Maybe it is. Maybe it shouldn't be that long. But when I say it's not a problem, what I mean is it's okay if there's content that I look at and go, nah, it doesn't appeal to me. That's fine. It's only when it's supposed to be for some people, but it doesn't work for those people that I think we have a real problem.
Yeah, and it's different. Something like or Labyrinth, I think players are able to put it and say, all right, well, that's on the side. That's supposed to be something that's really, really hard, and maybe I'll work up to it, or maybe I won't, but that's okay. But if you're saying to your player base, you know what, the difficulty of the core story mode is, that's too much for me. I'm going to be denied the actual story of the game. Then you have a serious problem, and you start to lose people.
Yeah. If not the story arc, if the story arc content isn't for the average player, and maybe even the slightly below average player, then are they going to be doing in the game, right? So there has to be something in the game that encourages people to continue playing, that encourages people to progress, and that has always been the progressional content, the story arc content, where you could run through this content with the roster you're likely to have at that moment. If you're a stronger player, you can probably get through it quicker. And if you're a weaker player, you could grind through the game a little bit, a reasonable amount, on a timescale of weeks, maybe months, but you could catch up to the content and you could revisit it. And that has always been true up until Act 5. And then I think it is Act 5 where that starts to slightly tip away from where I would say below average players are going to have extreme difficulty getting through that content with any kind of reasonable roster. And then Act 6 just blows that completely away. If you're an average player with an average roster, I don't think you get through Act 6 at all.
Yeah. Well, and then you've got the champion there in the middle of it, just looking like this major roadblock too. And you hear some of these horror stories.
I mean, are they even getting past Mr. Sinister to see that map, right? 6-1.
Well, if they've got Heimdall and Angela and Gladiator Hulk or Hyperion, maybe. It gets very specific.
Right. Gladiator Hulk, and you use the Heimdall synergy to get the Fury, then that fight is relatively, and you play aggressively, and you just say, you know what, I'm just going to play as aggressively as possible, deal as much damage as possible, and if I die, I die. You can actually solo that fight. I soloed that fight with Gladiator Hulk, just going all aggressive with that exact combination. And then I thought to myself, okay, which combination am I going to use next? And I'll let you know when I find it. There are other combinations that could work. I'm not saying that there aren't, but I'm saying that there are relatively few. And once you get away from that one combination, you start to also require higher and higher specific skill levels to off those combinations. So that's and I'm not saying that you shouldn't try to get those skill levels, but it does narrow the options. Even if an option exists, it may be an option that a particular player may take a very long time, if ever, to really master the skills necessary. And that's no different than saying you don't have the champ. If you don't have the skills, you don't have the champ either. So, that Act 6-1, I think, was barely within the realm of what I would say an average player might be able to get away with a above average roster. That's something that a B+ player with a C+ roster might be able to get through if they pick the right path.
Oh, I love that line. That's a great sentence.
But I don't think that that's true for 6-2. And so at some point, I think in some place in 6.2, they're probably going to get roadblocked, especially because the paths require stronger rosters, right? I mean, there's a really easy path to Sinister if you have like a giant 6-star roster you can throw in there alongside of it or something like that, right? So I know that the devs tried to make the different paths have different kinds of difficulty with the different gates and things of that nature. And it was a nice idea on paper. But I think what it does in reality is it creates such narrow paths to get through the content that even if a player could navigate those narrow paths, both in terms of their skill and in terms of getting lucky with their crystals, the amount of time it could take gets so long that at some point they just get disheartened. They just say, "What's the point?"
Right.
So.
Right, and then the bad pulls. I think we see this a lot now, where the bad pulls are really weighing on people because they've gotten to the roadblock. They've been told what the key is to get through the roadblock, and they know they can't do anything until they get that one champ.
Yeah, and I think that's another area in terms of difficulty that I think there's a really subtle but very, very critical problem that exists with how Kabam is designing at least some parts of difficulty. And I see it show up like in Act 6, where a lot of people have complained in the past and still complain now that there's only a few champions that are really important, that there are the quote-unquote god tier champions. And if you have those champions or certain specific counters, then you can get through all the content. If you don't, none of the other champs matter. And I think Kabam has recognized that and has tried to address that. But I think the way they're doing it is ironically making the problem worse. If you have only one champ, if only one champ works in the content and it can get you through the entire content, that's bad. But if you decide to fix that by saying, okay, well, now you need two, like we're going to make this other champ necessary. Mm-hmm. That way, now you can't just go through the content with just this one champ. Now you need two. And here's another fight we're going to design that has a very specific set of requirements. And all those other god tier champs don't work in it. Now you need another. Well, you are increasing the usability of the roster. You're making champs that were not useful before useful, but you're also making them necessary. And I think when instead of making a champ useful, you make it necessary, you're just magnifying the problem. You're saying, well, now here's 10 champs you need. And you have to try to fit those 10 champs in a 5-champ team. That makes life even more difficult. But I think in many cases where Kabam has tried to make champions useful, they've made them necessary. And that, I think, amplifies the problem of trying to pull the right champ.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I think the beta for Book 2 really showcased that problem, because so much of that was, all right, we're going to give you some nodes you saw in Act 6, and we're going to look at how you beat it, and then we're going to put in a node that counters that champion. So exactly like you said, someone else becomes necessary. Not usable, but necessary. Yeah,
and I think, and one of the things that I mentioned, and I think other people have touched on, is the notion that it often seems like Kabam is trying to punish players for bad play, not reward them for good play.
Yep.
A lot of the node combinations seem to be that on a meta level. Like, oh, did you bring Ghost for that fight the last time? Well, now you can't.
Right. Exactly.
It wasn't making a new opportunity. It was eliminating the one you were using. Now go find another one. But it didn't seem like the other one was supposed to be. It seemed like a lot of the node combinations, it's obvious what they're trying to prevent you from. But it's not obvious what they encourage you to use.
Right. It's all, I think I said this, I might have said this on last week's show. It's all stick, no carrot. Like at least send me in a direction. Like, okay, like you're going to take some stuff away. Like give me something else to work with too. And we've seen that a lot with some of the variant content that people have brought out. And it's like, well, you guys know how to do this. Like someone over there knows how to make King Groot pretty cool and Dormammu actually effective on a lane. Like where's the bonus if you're going to take something away? So that's, from a design standpoint, that's something I'd like to see. It sounds like you're kind of in the same place.
Yeah, I think I made a post a while back where I sort of talked about my sort of general ideas on what makes particular fights interesting and not punishing. And the example I used, and I used this example in the book 2 beta as well. It's not a good example, but it's a simple example. I mentioned the example of using spiked armor and dulled. That node combination. Each of those by themselves is awful. Nobody wants to see those nodes. Nobody wants to see spiked armor. And nobody wants to see dulled because it just makes the fight long. But when you combine those two nodes together, there's an obvious sense of, well, spiked armor causes me damage if I land a crit. But dulled takes away all my crit chance if I have buffs. So if I bring a champ that has lots of buffs, I won't take any spiked armor damage. And I thought, that seems to be a way to reward the player for thinking about the content. And it does it in a way that doesn't say, use this champ. Because there's lots of buffs. And because there's a wide selection of them, you could still decide which one was your favorite or which one was appropriate to that specific defender. And when you, at least in my opinion, when you think about the fight like that, and then you find a champ in your roster that works, and then you beat the fight, there is this reward, not in the sense of in-game rewards, but there's a psychological reward that says, I beat it.
Yeah, you know? I outsmarted it. Yeah. I finished the puzzle. Exactly.
Whereas if you fight a fight where there's like 10,000 attack on the thing and you don't get hit, you think to yourself, I got lucky, right? It's like, well, thank God I hope I never have to fight it again, because there's no sense of, I mean, there is skill involved, but there's no sense of yeah, I beat that content. It was like I escaped with my life.
Right, I had enough revives.
Yeah. Punishing. You don't feel like you won. You feel like you didn't lose.
Yeah.
So there, and I'm not saying that that's a good combination to be putting in every fight. I'm saying that that's an example of how you can. There are nodes you can make where it seems like it's just all punishment. It's just all stick and. But then there are ways, like life transfer. Everybody loves life transfer. Nobody mentions that life transfer has a permanent degen, but nobody cares because there's that degen, and if you just stand there and stare, then it'll kill you. But if you play aggressively, and who doesn't want to play aggressively, then you leave the fight with more health than when you started from. And I mean, that's worth more than almost any reward you can give the player on the map, in terms of chests or things like that. If you can leave the fight with more health, I mean, that's effectively free potion. But it's a skillful reward for free potions. You feel like your skill stole something from the game. And I experience the developers should put in there. They should be letting the players, so to speak, cheat the game. And I don't mean that in the literal sense, but I mean in the sense of you want the players to think they got away with something. Because that reward can be as important as catalysts and gold and battle chip.
But do you think at that point that Kabam may have fallen on they've created themselves a strong rigid background with backbone with variants, but then everything in that spinal column has now has kind of collapsed to a degree because they're not creating this reward content with this kind of rewarding content, or this kind of like dangle the carrot and stick thing with Act 6, because they've gone like, okay, we've presented you with, here you go, here's what you could have won, here's some great content, but also we've got to do this. Do you think people kind of go, right, variants are the new standard to judge everything else on now?
I think there's some of that. Everybody looked at Seaton's video and they took a lot of different things away from that video. And in the first post I made in the general feedback thread, I said that that everybody is sort of impressing upon that video their problems with the game, and a lot of people have a lot of different problems.
Yeah,
many of them perfectly valid for different kinds of players. But the thing I took away is, here's a player that, for all intents and purposes, spends an unlimited amount and everything. He has every champion. He has done all the content, and he's still burned out. Even though, relative to almost anyone else, the amount of rewards that he's gotten from the game, in-game reward, is effectively unlimited. Right? Effectively, he's gotten more rewards from the game than anybody else. Almost anybody else. Between what he's spent and what he's bought and what he's earned from his gameplay. He's sitting on a massive war chest of rewards that most players are never going to see. And yet, he's dissatisfied with the content. He's burned out with the content. And there are lots of reasons for that. I don't want I don't want to speak for him, and I don't want to overgeneralize.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I took from it is, well, no matter how much rewards you give to the player, you can still end up here. So we can't rely only on in-game rewards to bribe people to play the content. The content itself has to be worth playing. If the content was actually worth playing, Satan would just go right back in and play it, even if there were no rewards anymore. I mean, he would just play it over and over and over again because it was fun. And I'm not saying that you can just do that indefinitely and without getting bored, but this idea that if we just increase the amount of rewards in the game, if we can make the difficulty anything we want, as long as we bribe people into playing it. I think Satan shows where the end game for that is, which is you still end up with somebody who's done everything, who's gained everything, and is still unhappy with certain parts of the game. And I think that tell you the opposite story, that difficulty can be pretty high. I mean, a lot of people say they're not as high as Act 6, and they're probably not. But I mean, relative to the average player, relative even to most players, the difficulty is not easy. You can't just sleepwalk through that unless you're one of the top players. There is difficulty in there, but it's difficulty that people seem to want to do at their own pace. I want to pull off a path on there. I want to eventually explore it. And yes, there are a lot of rewards in there. And for the top players in the game who can just immediately fully explore it, it's a pretty good haul. But for players who are just picking off one path at a time, who are doing it at their own pace, who are doing it very slowly, the rewards over time are actually not that. I mean, you're getting those rewards, but you're getting them over months, maybe even years. It's not a lot of rewards when you think about it. But people are still doing it. They're willing to do it in part because I think the content is not as punishing to them. So to them, those rewards are worth going after, even if they're a long-term gain, just because the content itself is not discouraging them from pursuing those rewards. So if you can make content that's interesting enough that people want to play it, even if, like, a lot of people are proud of having completed Variant 4 or Variant 3, and they say, oh yeah, I just did my first path, or yeah, I just completed it. There's a certain amount of fun just in telling people you've done it. Like people, they are uncollected. That makes the rewards the icing on the cake. Whereas with Act 6, it's like all icing on a cardboard box. There's nothing else but the icing in that content.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine back when Kabam were going to give us the original Act 6 rewards. With the amount of difficulty that was with Act 6, imagine 100%ing and getting a really rubbish return, even from a completion standpoint.
And I agree, those rewards did not make sense for the difficulty, but I think maybe the mistake everybody made was in saying, well, maybe the problem is not the reward. Maybe the problem is the content. Maybe the content should be worth doing by itself, and then the rewards are what they are. I think if that was the case, rewards would still be not really worth it, but they would be less of the problem. But if you think content is horrible and it's never going to get any better, the only thing you can ask for is enough rewards to make it kind of work. And that's a trap that I think we need to eventually get out of, especially with Book 2, where you have a chance to maybe not completely start over, but you have a chance to reimagine what difficulty is supposed to be and what the associated rewards are.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about what other people feel is the state of the game and kind of what our takes are and all this feedback. But DNA, where are you at with the game right now? Are you frustrated? Are you feeling good? If there's parts of the game that you think need to be improved, what would you like to see Kabam do going forward?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. I don't get as frustrated with difficult content maybe than some other people do. Maybe that's part of my MMO background, but if something's too difficult, then I step aside and come back later. And I guess I'm fortunate in that my skill level is high enough and my roster is strong enough that that's a viable strategy. I can just walk away and come back later. I don't get easily frustrated with the game. So for me personally, none of these problems are like deal breakers for me. I still enjoy playing them. I do have things that I get frustrated at or that I don't like. And some of those things I hope they improve. Some of those things I'm not sure if they should touch, simply because I don't like them. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody else doesn't like them. Although, if all you did was read the forums and today, you would think that there is no part of the game that people really, really.
Right.
But
Hmm.
no, if that's just a temporary thing, that's the feedback that's coming in right now. People are encouraged to come forward with their problems, whereas before they might not have been. But for example, I'll give you my burnout story. I think a lot of people have been coming forward and saying, well, I've been saying they're either burned out on the highest end content, like they don't want to fully explore Act 6, doesn't make sense, or they're burned out on high tier Alliance War, because that doesn't make sense. And I don't think Alliance War has made sense since like issue.
Thank you.
Yeah, preach.
Yeah. So my burnout came actually. My burnout moment came a while back. I used funny story about my Alliance. So as I mentioned, I was kind of taking a break from gaming when I was playing MCOC. So initially my goal was just play the game solo, just play the content. I wasn't even on the forums initially. Just keep your head down and play the content, just for fun. And then I got a random invite to join an Alliance, and I thought, yeah, what could it hurt? And what it turned out is I accidentally accepted an alliance invitation from an all Italian alliance. So like half the people English, but I was like, hey, I don't care. I'm just here to play the game anyway. But over time, I got to know those players. I got to enjoy playing with them, and that alliance started off as like this very tiny map 3 occasionally alliance, and it eventually grew to they were moving from map 5 to map 6. We were, I think, straddling the border between tier 5 and 6 in Alliance War. But I wasn't really happy. And I wasn't really happy because I couldn't compete. I was unhappy because I didn't like the idea of having to manage the Alliance on the basis of what people could do. I mean, I eventually became a battle group officer, and it then fell upon me to kick people out of the Alliance because they couldn't keep up. They couldn't keep up with map 5. Like they couldn't keep up with War. And then eventually when we were moving to map 6, it was like, well, half these people are not going to be able to do that. And the attitude was like, well, if half the people can't do it, we'll just replace them. And it was at that point that I realized this is not why I'm playing the game. I'm not playing the game to destroy other people's enjoyment of the game. To me, that was the point where I was like, this is not why I'm here. And I decided to take a pretty significant step back. The Alliance eventually split into the people who wanted to move up to map 6 to Platinum tier Alliance War, and I stayed down below with the people who wanted to remain. And then that happened again, because then as soon as the Alliance dropped down, we started to recruit people aggressively. And when you recruit people aggressively, you're often telling them, "Hey, come to our Alliance, we'll eventually get better." And then those people 6 months later are the ones who are saying, "Well, why aren't you to the higher map? Why aren't you going into the higher war?"
Yeah.
And eventually, but again, I said, I'm not going to do that. I saw that the last time. I'm not doing anything. So the burnout point was, I think I saw what other people saw, but from a slightly different angle. I did not see Alliance War becoming so frustrating that I didn't want to play it again. Alliance War becoming so frustrating I didn't want to play it again. I saw it become so much of a rat race that it was driving the game, and I didn't want to be a part of that. I was losing sleep thinking about who I was going to have to kick next. And that's not worth it in any game. And it was at that point that I said, you know what? I need to play more casually, not because I need to play more casually. I need to play more casually to surround myself with other people who are willing to play casually. So, in terms of where I am in the game, like right now, I basically close my eyes and do map 3. I do Alliance War, whatever. And my only, and now I'm the leader of this alliance because of course all the other leaders have decided to. My instruction to people is just do the best you can, but don't spend unless you really, really want to, or you have expiring potions. And if we lose, we lose. And in fact, our alliance has people who can compete in war, and it has people who legitimately cannot compete in war, not at all, not even a little bit. And what I do when the season starts is I open 2 battle groups. I say all the strong people go in battle group 1. We're going to try to kill the boss. Everybody else go in battle group 2. Do whatever the heck you want. Just dance around the defenders if you want. I don't care. Don't spend. Don't even try to spend.
Yep.
They die on the very first fight. I do that for 5 wars, so they get the season credit, and then I close that battle group and I do the rest of the wars with just battle group 1, where we have people who want to play serious enough to try, but still not serious enough that they're going to care a lot if they lose. And for me, I think that's how I've chosen to try to deal with the competitive pressures and the difficulty curve of the game is I'm willing to take on any difficulty I want personally.
Yeah.
And I'm not willing to impose it on other people who are going to be very unhappy.
Right, that's just that's a very healthy gaming philosophy right there.
I think what we're all trying to do, and that's obviously a good point, is cut out the stress. Same thing with Dan. Your alliance. I know we talk about this It's been several months in the making for you to restructure your alliance as an officer, and as well for the health and the stress levels of not just yourself as an officer, but obviously as the people that participate, and the same thing obviously that DNA 3000, because we I know you messaged myself when I decided to go alliance free, and it was just like reading what you put out about the idea of sort of going alliance free, building your own alliance, and participating enough to cultivate some glory. So I think at the end of the day, a lot of players at the same position is that, look, the competition side of the things of the game is the stress level. In order to enjoy the game, we have to minimize the stress, and I guess this is the thing. I'm hoping Kabam can do the right thing in reducing those stress levels down.
Yeah, I think that should be the ultimate goal, right? The ultimate goal is to make a game that's entertaining. And for some people, that is driving themselves crazy with competition. There are people who love it, who enjoy it, and they should be allowed to get some of it. But we should make sure that doesn't permeate the entire game, so that the people who don't enjoy it feel compelled to do it anyway. And that's the balancing act that's very, very difficult. Is you want to make a game that has something for everyone, but you can't make a game that just has like everything for one particular class of people.
It's really hard to design for the different needs of players at different places, especially with these alliance modes like Alliance Quest and Alliance War, because sometimes it feels like it's like, okay, well let's design something that's hard enough for the people who are pushing masters, and then we'll take a little bit away, and that'll be that'll be the challenger map, and we'll take a little bit more away, and that'll be like tier 6 and so on and so on. So it's just like, well, we're still getting this like watered down version of what the absolute top of the pyramid players need, and it's ended up being too much for the people further on downstream from them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of my take on it, but we will see. I think people are expecting a lot of communication from Kabam soon about all the feedback that has been given to them. DNA, since you're on the forum so much, like what would you like to see from Kabam as far as communication? Do you think it needs to be improved? The CCP has started to get these presentations about where the updates are going, that with a dev explaining what's happening and why. Is that something you'd like the community to see? Like where are you at with Kabam's communication right now?
I think the most diplomatic thing I could say is it could be better. I think the biggest problem with the communication, I think, is that we seem to be locked into a mode that's where whenever Kabam says anything, they get jumped on, and that probably makes them reluctant to say more. But the reason why they're jumped on every time they say anything is because they don't say very much. So players will pick apart every word they say because that's all we got. And that's kind of a difficult, vicious cycle to break out of. But honestly, I think the only people who could break out of it are Kabam. It's not the players that are going to just decide to communicate better with Kabam. It's Kabam that has to drive that forward. They're the ones with all the information.
Right. And I've gotten that question a lot too, is especially in the last week or so, since basically, there was the world before Seaton's video and the world after Seaton's video. And if you say why haven't they said anything, or are they just trying to wait us out? Are they not listening? I said they're not trying to wait it out. They're not ignoring. They're actually soliciting a lot of feedback, but they're not going to say anything until they know for 100% certainty what they want to do. And because it takes time to do that, you're not going to get progress report updates, and it's going to take longer to receive communication from them. So, and I think that's that's what happens. Like, that's why Seaton released his video like about 10 days ago, and we got all right, here's what happened with the beta, and that was pretty conclusive, and we got some other stuff. It's like, all right, yeah, we're listening, we'll let you know what we're going to do, but the player base hasn't really gotten an update since then. And I think that's where some of the struggle is, especially from people who aren't in the CCP and don't have the daily communication with them. Is that kind of how you see things?
Yeah, I think on the one hand, I recognize that there's limits to what they can tell us about future content or about plans, because whenever you say, well, this is what we're doing in the future, and then it changes, then everybody is going to call you a bunch of liars, or they're going to be disappointed because something didn't come out that they thought was going to come out. So I recognize sort of the dilemma about being careful about what you say you're going to do. But I think there's a lot of improvement they could make in terms of just keeping the communication channel open. Like, I think sometimes Kabam treats everything they say with some justification, like it has to be this handcrafted jewel that can't be picked apart. And they often fail anyway at that. They're sometimes will say things in ways that I understand what they're saying, but I can easily see how people could misinterpret this. And in the environment we're in, you do have to be much more careful about how you say what you say. But there are a lot of ways you can keep the communication channel open with the players in a way that does not involve releasing plans and things like that. I think a lot of people on both sides, I think Kabam might be seeing this. I don't know what they're thinking, but they might be. Even some players are thinking this, that there's only two possibilities. They can either tell us exactly what they're doing, or they can just say nothing. They can just sort of say, we're listening, and that's it. And I think there's a lot of room to communication, to just general thoughts and ideas. And sometimes I think the best way for a game developer to spark communication with their players in a way that doesn't tie them down with some kind of promise is, instead of telling us what they're going to do, they should ask questions. Hey, what are you guys thinking today about this, about that, about what do you guys, we were kind of thinking about doing a balance update like in 6 months. We have no plans yet, but what are your thoughts on who should be balanced? And you're going to get 10,000 posts on that, right? But
yeah.
But when you ask questions, you make people think that you're interested in what they're thinking about, that you're interested in their feedback. You don't necessarily have to promise that you're going to do anything with it, although in the long run, you have to take that information and eventually give the players something back. Eventually say, see, we were listening, this is why, this is something that was done because of your feedback. That has to happen eventually. But I think initially, the way to open communications is not to talk, but to listen. Say, what are you guys concerned about? What are you guys thinking about? But you can't like put a post in the forums that says, what are your thoughts? And then leave. You have to participate in the conversation, and you don't have to promise things. But just like with any conversation, right? When you're talking to just a person, you can't say, what are you thinking? And then go play on your phone, because that's rude. But you don't have to, but the other thing is, you can't just say, well, here's what I think, and then speak for like 10 hours while they can't, when they don't get a word in edgewise. There has to be dialogue. There has to be back and forth. And I think that's what's missing right now from the communication. They do make statements, they do take feedback, but there's no dialogue. There's no back and forth. There's no, yes, we agree with this. Well, no, we don't agree with this because of this, or we're considering this. Well, what do you think about that? That dialogue, the back and forth, is, I think, what's missing.
Yeah. God, there's a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration. Is there anything further, Dan, that we should be asking?
No, I mean we've gotten through all the questions, and honestly,
It's,
I
it's
was it was great to just listen to you riff on this stuff for an hour. DNA, just I think you've managed to clarify a lot of the feelings I have about the game, and uh, just with your analysis, and you've just broken it down in a way that I haven't been able to. So I certainly appreciate all the sort of the context and thought you've put into this.
it's been
So I don't.
incredibly fascinating.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, um, people in the forums, obviously, DNA 3000 puts out a lot of intricate, well researched analytics, which are just fantastic to just read through and just get a different perspective, because a lot of the times it's a bit different from just going on the forum just going, you're making content too hard, Kabam. But broken down, obviously, in these posts, it does give people more of perspective on where it is, and as well there's a good pulse on the community standpoint. So thank you for your time and coming by. Is there any new post you're working on, out of curiosity?
I tend to think about them more than I tend to write on them. I have a lot of things that I've been looking at right now. One of the things that I've been thinking about, and I don't know where this is going to go, so I don't have like a post that's like half written that I'm going to post. But Rich, you mentioned that you used to play World of Warcraft, and my background is in MMOs. And when you were playing in World of Warcraft, I presume you were in a guild, right? You were in a.
I was in a guild, yes.
So when you were in that guild, how many players were kicked out of that guild for being unable to do the top raid content in the game?
Oh, too many. Beyond, that's actually one of the reasons that I decided to leave it. But you could see just like 5 a day being kicked each and every day.
And I think that happens here as well. Now, in my experience, in all the MMOs I've played, sometimes that's happened and sometimes that hasn't happened. There are some MMOs where when the game seems to be focused, at least at the top, there seems to be a transition. You play the game up to a certain point and it's a certain game. And then it transitions into, quote unquote, the end game. And it is at that point that alliances or groups, whatever they're called in the game, become much more focused on efficiency and optimization. Everybody must work together to drive the guild forward in a particular way. And it seems MCOC alliances are like that from the very beginning. I mean, from the very beginning, you can enforce casual play, but the game encourages you to have a full alliance in which everyone is always participating. Right? There are penalties for not having 30 people in AQ or 30 people in Alliance War. And what do you do when you have 25 people, right? Like 20 people, you open 2 groups. 30 people, you open 3 groups. 24 people, you're kind of trapped in like no man's land. And you have to start saying, well, you either have to recruit 6 people or kick 4 people.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what pushes people into content that they don't like to do or that they don't want to do. All 30 people have to be exactly the same, have to have exactly the same strength, and have to enjoy the same difficulty, or else the alliance breaks apart. I think that's a symptom of a larger problem in the game regarding how we focus on content, how the content delivers itself to us, what options we're allowed to play as.
Yeah.
But I'm not exactly where that thought is going. I have some idea, but I'm still thinking about it.
Brilliant. I look forward to that coming out, and obviously we can put it into Marvel Contest Champions News. Maybe it's something we can bring you back on and discuss at a later date. Dan, I'm just going to go to Dan. Dan, what are you up to next week?
I am working on some Act 6 guides. I'm going to play some riffs.
Nice.
And tentatively on Friday will be my first showdown with the 6.2 champion.
Ooh.
I've been putting it off.
Yeah, I've got to go back to it with I've
Yeah.
got to go back to. I don't want to. I really don't want to, but I'm going to have to.
Yeah,
I
well,
wish
this
you all
is-
the luck.
Yeah, this is for me. This is just going to be the initial clear, and then I'll most likely move on to 6.3.
Good.
But I would be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. I know a lot of people are like, oh, you've got Symbiote Supreme. You'll be you'll be fine. Do this, do that. It's like, okay. I've
We'll
also heard
see.
people say they dumped 2,000 units on this fight, so
Yeah.
I'm a little bit nervous. Definitely going to be spending some time watching some videos this week, and Cam has generously offered for a little bit of tutoring, so
Fantastic.
I may take him up on that so that I can save my stash.
Delightful. Right, thank you very much, DNA 3000, for your time and obviously waking up so early in Hawaii for us.
No problem. Anytime.
Fantastic. And yeah, you can catch all the links in bio. I'll put DNA 3000's post as well. Obviously, Dan Frontline MCOC. Make sure you make it as your bookmark when you obviously put up your Google. It's in case it's there for you to gather all the information about the game, and Twitter as well. I'll put Dan's links as always. Thank you very much for listening in and a little bit of watching, and see you all next week. Bye bye.